Kate Walker's light has not gone out. That would be simpler than the pale wavering at the edge of the flame, which asks for work before it becomes a problem. You are beside her in the lantern room at Robbins Reef in the 1890s, while ice freckles the outer glass and New York Harbor moves beyond it in darkness. The great secret of getting through this night is already here. It is not courage held at full blaze until morning. It is routine, redundancy, and another person ready to take the next watch. If these evenings honestly help you set the day down, consider subscribing and tell me where you are listening and the local time there. Let the room around you grow dim. Find a comfortable position and follow Kate as she brings the cloth closer to the lamp. She does not begin by admiring the harbor. She studies the flame. The lamp needs fuel, trimmed wicks, clear glass, and a mechanism that keeps the signal moving as intended. A Fresnel lens can gather and direct the source light, but it cannot excuse a smoky wick or refill its own reservoir. Kate watches for another breath. The flame steadies, then leans again. Outside, a thin patch of ice has formed where the lantern glass meets the cold. The night has presented its first official memorandum, written in frost and requiring no envelope. You watch Kate turn down the flame just enough to work safely near it. The motion is practiced and unhurried. A flame raised too high can smoke, and smoke means soot on the chimney, the lens, and the lantern glass. A flame kept too low does not serve the ships that expect the light's proper character. The useful setting lies between those failures, and it has to be noticed rather than assumed. She checks the wick edge. It is not badly charred, only uneven at one point. With the small tool kept for the task, she removes the roughness and leaves a clean line. The adjustment is modest. That is why it matters. Lighthouse work is full of changes so small that nobody beyond the room will know they occurred, provided they occur in time. The cold pane beside her remains cloudy. Kate presses the folded cloth against the inner glass, then looks along the lens panels for any film. The lens is not a magical source of brightness. It bends and concentrates what the lamp gives it, so every bit of smoke and dirt takes something away from the beam. The distinction is plain when you stand this close. Glass, brass, wick, fuel, air, and clockwork are separate parts, each dependent on a person who knows what a normal night looks like. The flame rises cleanly when she returns it to working height. She waits long enough to see that it stays there. The ice is outside, and the narrow gallery around the lantern is not an inviting place to make a point about dedication. Kate makes no point. She takes the scraper and opens the lantern room door, only as far as she needs. Cold air pushes in around her sleeves. You remain just behind the threshold, while she steps onto the gallery and begins clearing the patch that interrupts the outward view. Robbins Reef stands about a mile north of Staten Island, on an offshore ledge rather than at the end of a comfortable road. The station is a tower, workplace, and home fitted into the same small footprint. Weather reaches it before errands do. Personal supplies require a row to shore, while official stores such as oil and coal arrive on a different, slower schedule. Distance here is not melodrama. It is the reason a missing household item may stay missing until someone can take the boat. Kate scrapes a narrow section, wipes it, and checks the light through it. She does not need to polish the whole harbor. She needs the lantern glass clear enough for the signal to remain visible. Another strip of ice yields under the scraper. The sound is dry and close, unlike the broader water sounds below. When she comes inside, she shuts the door firmly and sets the scraper where it can be found again. The light has a clean path outward. Her hands are cold. The watch has only begun, which is why she warms them before taking on the next task, rather than pretending they are made of lighthouse brass. You follow Kate down from the lantern room to the working level below. The stairs curve tightly because the tower gives no space away for free. Every trip carries a purpose. Oil upward, ash or used cloth downward, a tool fetched, a sound investigated. Repeated stairs are one of the station's quiet forms of weather. They arrive in all seasons and require no forecast. The household is still awake. A child has left a small task half finished near the table, and the assistant has already arranged what will be needed for the later watch. We cannot know the exact conversation of this winter night, and there is no need to invent one. The arrangement itself says enough. Someone has made sure the lamp supplies are ready. Someone knows when the handoff comes. Someone will listen for the fog signal while another person checks the flame. Kate first came to Robbins Reef as an assistant keeper with her husband John in 1885. She learnt the station as a worker, not as a visitor waiting for the scenery to improve. After his death in 1890, she performed the principal keeper's duties for years before receiving the permanent appointment in 1895. The title followed the work, rather than creating it. She measures the oil needed for the night and checks the container against the expected use. Official duty shares this room with meals, washing, children, and the ordinary disorder that appears wherever people live. The lamp may have federal importance, but the oil can still be set down beside a domestic cloth because the tower has no separate palace for bureaucracy. Before carrying the oil upward, you see Kate inspect the vessel for grit and the cap for a clean fit. The 1881 federal instructions required careful management of stores and exact entries for supplies taken into daily use. That rule belongs to the larger service, not to one private habit at Robbins Reef, but it explains why a keeper measures rather than guesses. Oil that vanishes into an average is oil the station cannot account for later. Kate lifts the container. It is not dramatic weight, yet it must go up the same curved stairs that she has just descended. An older child at a Lighthouse household could be part of such movements, and family members often contributed directly to station work. Here the camera remains with Kate, but the household around her does not disappear simply because the principal keeper is the named person in the record. At the next landing, she pauses to listen. The signal machinery below is quiet because the weather has not demanded it. Quiet does not mean ignored. The fog bell must remain wound, and the siren ready, because fog does not apply for an appointment before arriving. Kate's later summary of her work reduced the matter to keeping the light burning, the fog bell wound, and the siren ready all the time. The words are plain because the tasks were repeated. She continues upward with the oil. The container reaches the lantern room without a spill. That is a small success, although the stairs have declined to issue a certificate. You stand near the lamp as Kate adds oil with the same care she used below. She does not fill blindly to the top. The reservoir, feed, burner, and wick have to work together. Fuel is necessary, but more fuel in the wrong place is not improvement. A lighthouse lamp is a system of controlled supply, and the person tending it is part of that control. She wipes the neck of the container before replacing the cap. Any trace of oil left on a working surface can gather dirt, carry a smell through the warm room, or become one more thing to clean at sunrise. The cloth goes into its proper place. Order at the station is not decorative. It shortens the search when a wick needs attention at an inconvenient hour. The beam passes through the lens and out across the harbour. You can understand the lens without turning the room into an optics lecture. Its prisms bend the lamp's light into useful directions. They do not create fuel, trim cloth, align a burner, or notice soot. That division of labour is one reason the human watch matters even when the machinery is impressive. Kate looks through a clear section of lantern glass and waits for the signal to repeat. She is not watching every ship as an individual story. She is checking whether the light behaves as the station is meant to behave. The harbour receives a dependable pattern because the work inside the tower has a pattern of its own. Satisfied, she moves to the clockwork. The winding will come early. The mechanism can run longer than Kate allows it to run. In the account she gave a newspaper years later, she said the lamp mechanism did not need winding more than once in 5 hours, but she wound it every 3. You watch her fit her hands to the crank well before the longest interval has passed. This is the least cinematic and most important decision of the night. She does not test the machinery's endurance for the satisfaction of learning whether the published limit was accurate. She creates margin. The weight is raised before it reaches the bottom. A delayed trip upstairs, an uneven flame, or a sudden need at the fog signal will therefore begin with time in reserve. The crank turns with resistance. Teeth engage inside the housing. A cable or chain draws the driving weight upward, storing the slow work that gravity will return through the gears. At another station, the weight, drop, and interval may be entirely different. Robbins Reef has its own apparatus, just as every light has its own characteristic and setting. The only safe general statement is that a descending weight cannot wind itself back up. Als bermtiepace can maybe lenum burn meerland burn. De man van de meest connection for Kongwam, Dinsikor, de Moskan Mia nam de tod, petition tin forniment stash common de man in Gimbarn nam stashum fun ban in modicent giskend, and spin none and de tod, damned manoia man be a storm, me man being by, and skin bin sparbibshim dint bum and anum, and minin din miskindami in Kong spent binstum din my ideas, and dongum spint kim spendin da, tom cord, dum mimb, minom pice. It has merely been given another 3 hours of her caution. Somewhere below, an ordinary household clock marks the same night, with much less responsibility and a considerably smaller iron weight. You remain in the lantern room for the next full passage of the signal. Kate checks the motion, listens for a change in the gears, and compares the flame with the clean edge she established earlier. Nothing is wrong. That result has to be earned repeatedly, because a mechanism can be correct at 10 o'clock and require attention later. Federal instructions for staffed stations required the person on watch to stay in the watchroom and give continuous attention to the light. They also required watch duties to be divided so that an equal share fell to each keeper. Those rules make the station less like a solitary vigil and more like a carefully handed sequence. The person at the lamp is responsible, but not meant to become the only person who ever rests. The handoff does not erase her responsibility. It makes the responsibility sustainable. A fresh pair of eyes can notice smoke, sound, weather, or a slowing mechanism that exhausted eyes might accept as normal. The Hulcher's meanings just endings what materials and reviews what the assistant will need to know later. The flame is steady, the glass has been cleared, oil has been added, the clockwork has been wound early, the fog equipment is ready but not operating. Each fact is simple. Together they form the night's working condition. Kate closes the book for now. The next entry belongs after something changes, or after the watch itself changes hands. The tower carries every sound through its iron and masonry. You hear a step below, then the soft clink of something placed on a table. The station is small enough that domestic movement and official movement overlap, yet they are not the same task. A meal must be cleared because people live here. The lamp must be checked because mariners depend on its signal. One person may move from one obligation to the other without either becoming imaginary. Kate descends with the empty oil container. The children have been part of her life at Robbins Reef, and the station's isolation shaped their errands and routines. Personal supplies lay 1 mile of water away. In good conditions, that distance could be rowed. In winter, it could delay what a family wanted, which is different from depriving the light of planned official stores. She checks that the household fire is safe, that the door is secure, and that nothing needed for the assistant's watch has migrated beneath a coat or a school item. The assistant's later turn must begin with tools where expected. A misplaced wick tool at midnight can create a search through a home that is trying to settle. The domestic room has no wish to be described as heroic. It contains used cups, folded cloth, and the evidence of people sharing too little space with important equipment. Kate restores enough order for the night. Polished brass may attract another fingerprint immediately, but the station has at least supplied the fingerprint with an excellent background. You climb again with Kate, carrying nothing this time except attention. The absence of a load makes the stairs easier, not short. At the lantern room, she checks the outer panes for fresh ice. The cleared sections remain open, though a new haze has begun at one corner where warm interior air meets winter glass. She wipes the inside and then studies the lamp chimney. A faint mark there would be soot from incomplete burning, and soot would tell her to examine wick height, draft, or fuel flow. The mark she sees is only the trace left by the earlier adjustment. She removes it before it can become a useful excuse for a larger mark later. The official instructions described gradual lighting, steady white flame, careful ventilation, spare burners, and trimming without shocking hot glass. Those detailed rules matter because glass and flame do not respond well to impatience. Kate does not recite a manual. She acts in the same world of hot chimneys, cold air, soft wick, and oil passages. A gust reaches the tower and changes the sound around the lantern. The flame barely moves. Kate checks the ventilator position and leaves it. Not every gust requires correction. Skilled work includes knowing when a system has absorbed a change and when a person would only disturb a good setting. The light completes another rotation or repeating display. Whatever the exact characteristic at this date, Kate expects consistency. She sees it again, then again. The night advances by repetitions that are never quite unattended. Downstairs, you find the assistant awake enough to take in details. We do not invent a speech between the two workers. A proper handoff can be shown through what Kate places within reach and what the assistant checks in return. The watch key is present. The oil and wick tools are ready. The signal machinery has no reported fault. The glass has been cleared once and may need clearing again. Wear stations had more than one keeper. Federal rules required a watchbook signed when a person came off duty, with the condition of the light and the hour recorded. If a fog signal was operating, its condition also belonged there. That requirement turns relief into more than a sleepy nod on a staircase. The next person receives a condition that can be stated and later traced. Midnight has not arrived, so the assistant does not yet take charge. Kate gives the arrangements one final look and returns to the lamp. This repeated crossing between rooms is the night itself. It does not need a wreck, a phantom, or a sudden madness to become a story. The practical question is whether a small household can keep each necessary thing ready until the next person is responsible. The assistant adjusts a sleeve and listens to the tower. Kate begins another climb. The arrangement has the quiet fairness of shared work, though no one has ever accused a midnight staircase of being generous. You reach the lantern room as the mechanism continues its measured descent. Kate does not wait for the 3-hour point with her hands folded. She cleans the surface around the lamp, checks for any oil trace, and feels the housing for an unusual vibration. Each task fits around the need to keep the light operating. The lens panels stand close enough to show their construction as separate prisms, rather than one thick window. They concentrate and direct the source flame into the intended beam. Their effectiveness depends on alignment and cleanliness. Dust, soot, or a shifted lamp can take precision away without producing a theatrical failure. That is why daily brass cleaning and periodic lens polishing appear in Kate's later account, alongside winding and watching. She uses a clean cloth on a small accessible surface, careful not to leave grit that could scratch glass. The work is selective because the lamp remains in service. The larger cleaning belongs after sunrise or during planned maintenance, when the apparatus can be put in order for the next lighting. Beyond the lantern, harbour lights occupy the darkness at different heights. Kate does not need to count them. Her task is the one signal for which this station is responsible. You look with her as its light passes the same clear pane she scraped earlier. There is no applause from the water. Dependability is often recognized only when it disappears. Kate prefers the less interesting evidence. The beam returns on time. A small sound rises from the working rooms. Not an alarm, only a child moving in sleep, or an object settling as the tower cools. You see Kate pause. She has official duty above and family below. both contained by the same walls. The pause lasts long enough to identify the sound. Then she returns to the flame. Women at American light stations were not decorative exceptions waiting to appear in a special paragraph. They assisted husbands and fathers, inherited appointments, and held keeper and assistant positions across coasts and decades. Kate's employment belongs within that professional history. Her household responsibilities also remain real, but they do not cancel the technical work or turn it into a favor. She looks at the time. The early winding has left comfortable margin. The flame still burns evenly. A narrow edge of frost is beginning outside, but it has not reached the cleared sight line. She decides to leave it until the next round rather than open the door for a patch that is not yet interfering. That judgment is part of routine. Check, compare, act only when needed, then check again. Too little attention risks failure. Constant unnecessary adjustment can create failure of its own. Kate settles in the watch space, not to gaze dreamily at the sea, but to remain where the apparatus can be seen and heard. The next few minutes contain no event beyond the light doing exactly what it should. That is the event she has arranged. You can feel how the night's rhythm begins to lower its voice. Kate's movements are still purposeful, but the first uncertainty has been answered. The wick is even. The oil is sufficient. The ice has been cleared. The clockwork was wound before necessity forced the matter. Now the work is to preserve those conditions until midnight. She checks the fog signal readiness from the appropriate level. Robbins Reef used both a fog bell and a siren in its working life, and Kate later spoke of keeping the bell wound and the siren ready. Exact apparatus changed over time, so this night does not borrow a different station's machinery or timing. Readiness means that the system expected here is available if visibility closes. No fog has settled thickly enough to call the signal into service. Kate verifies what can be verified without starting a performance for an audience that has not asked for it. Controls are in order. The bell mechanism has reserve. Tools for a manual response are not buried. The station's purpose is to provide a characteristic warning and guide, not to compete with every sound in the harbour. A fog signal identifies place through a pattern just as a flashing light does. It matters because visibility can remove the beam while leaving sound useful. Kate returns to the stair. She has inspected a quiet machine and found it ready. That result goes nowhere in a legend. It goes into the safe remainder of the night. At the table, you watch Kate make a small note for the later log. Federal Lighthouse journals after 1872 could compress weather, work, visits, supplies, and unusual events into a single line for the day. Kate's own description says she posted the log after sunrise and included everything from oil consumed to the state of the weather. A note now protects the morning entry from fatigue. She records only what she needs to remember. Ice cleared, flame adjusted, mechanism wound at the earlier interval, weather observed, signal ready. The exact words of this reconstructed note are unknowable, so the narration does not supply them as a quotation. The action is supported even when the sentence is not. A log is not a diary of feelings. It is an operating memory for the station and a basis for reports to a distant government. It also lets one worker hand facts to another without requiring the tower to remember on their behalf. Kate sets the pencil down and checks the time again. Household paper can wander. Official paper is kept where it belongs. This distinction is easier to maintain before midnight than during a hurried search at dawn. The note looks almost insulting beside the labor it represents. Several climbs, cold glass, oil, wick, gears, and listening have become a few dry marks. The government will eventually receive order, weather, and quantities. It will not receive the opinion of Kate's hands about the temperature of the gallery rail. You return with Kate to the lantern room for the final full check before the handoff begins. She opens the door briefly and clears the new edge of ice. This time the patch is smaller. The scraper travels only a short distance. and she comes back inside before the cold can change the lamp's draft. The flame receives a close look. No ragged carbon has formed along the wick. The chimney remains clear. She checks the fuel feed and the motion of the signal. The winding reserve is still ample because she chose not to use the mechanism to its limit. That choice answers part of the title promise. People got through the night by declining to make every component prove its maximum endurance. They rewound early, kept spares, divided watches, wrote conditions down, and left another person able to continue. Redundancy is not waste when the alternative is a dark light and no time to repair it. Kate hears the assistant begin to move below. Midnight is close. She does not squeeze one more unnecessary task into her watch, merely to finish impressively. She prepares to transfer a known, stable system. The light crosses the cleared pane again. She watches one repetition beyond the point at which she was already satisfied. Then she turns toward the stairs, carrying the current condition in memory and leaving the lamp operating behind her. This routine lighthouse duty is also distinct from the United States Life-Saving Service and its beach patrols. A lightkeeper might assist in an emergency, but maintaining the lamp and signal belongs to a different institution and a different nightly obligation. Halfway down, you pause with Kate at the landing where lantern warmth gives way to the cooler center of the tower. The assistant is coming up. In a larger station, relief might happen in a separate watchroom with more space. Here the exchange fits itself into the architecture available. Kate gives the essential facts. The flame was trimmed and now burns evenly. Oil was added and no leak was seen. Ice was cleared twice, most recently only at the edge. The mechanism was wound early and has reserve. The fog equipment is ready and not in use. Nothing in that list is exciting, which is precisely why the next keeper can begin without surprise. The assistant continues upward and checks rather than merely accepts. Shared responsibility is not blind trust. It is trust supported by inspection. The new watch belongs to a person who will see the flame and hear the gears directly. Kate waits until the assistant reaches the working level. The watchbook can record the hour and condition according to the station's practice. Her own later account says she went to bed after midnight if all was well, leaving the assistant in charge. The phrase, "if all was well," contains the whole check. She descends the remaining stairs. Official duty has changed hands, not vanished. Above, another adult stands between the lamp and the bottom of the waits travel. You stay near Kate as she checks the household before resting. A child is covered, the small fire is safe, and the exterior door is secure against the winter air. These are not interruptions to lighthouse history. They are part of what it meant for a family to live inside or beside a federal station. Kate raised 2 children at Robbins Reef while serving the light. The record tells us that fact, but not the details of this particular night. We can therefore keep the household present without inventing a whispered conversation or assigning a child a task that no source documents for the moment. The careful boundary leaves the real workload large enough. From above comes the steady mechanical sound of the assistant's watch. Kate listens long enough to distinguish it from trouble. She has made the first half of the night handoff possible by preparing everything before exhaustion forced a decision. Her bed is close to the apparatus in the way everything at Robbins Reef is close to everything else. Physical distance within the tower is small. Responsibility reaches through floors. If the assistant calls, if the signal is needed, or if the mechanism sounds wrong, she can return. For now, she removes her outer layer and sits. Rest at a light station is not abandonment. It is one part of the schedule that allows the next inspection to be made by a person who can see clearly. Above Kate, the assistant begins the new watch by looking at the lamp before touching anything. You can imagine the sequence without changing the camera into another person's private biography. The assistant checks the flame, the glass, and the motion that Kate has just described. Condition first, adjustment second. This matters because every handoff contains the possibility of an assumption. A tool left ready may have been used since it was placed there. A flame described as even may change during the climb. The assistant verifies what is now true and signs for the hour when the watch changes. Kate hears the steps settle overhead. The household grows quieter. Her own watch has ended, but the title story has not become the tale of one woman finally surrendering to sleep. The station continues through another worker. That continuity is the point. The assistant's first round reaches the early wound mechanism. Its reserve does not remove the need to return before the weight reaches the bottom. It gives the new keeper room to plan the return instead of racing an iron deadline. The next winding will be another chosen action. Kate lies down, still within hearing of the tower. You remain aware of both levels. One person resting, one person watching, children nearby, machinery in motion. The light is dependable because responsibility is moved without a gap. The assistant's watch proceeds in small comparisons. You follow the sound upward as the wick burns. The oil level lowers by degrees, and the clockwork spends the energy Kate stored. No single change announces itself. The person on watch notices whether the total remains normal. At the lantern, a faint edge appears on the wick. The assistant turns the flame down, trims only what is needed, and raises it slowly again. Hot glass is treated carefully. A spare burner remains ready, not because failure is expected every hour, but because readiness shortens the distance between fault and correction. Outside, the cleared panes begin collecting another thin film. The assistant waits until it interferes, then scrapes the necessary section. Kate's earlier work has not been wasted because it must be repeated. Repetition is the work. Below, Kate sleeps through this round. That is not neglect. She has left a trained person in charge after establishing a stable condition. The assistant's action confirms why staffed stations divided watches, rather than asking one keeper to remain sharp from sunset to sunrise. The beam continues across the harbour. A vessel that sees it receives no indication of which adult has just trimmed the wick, or that the other keeper is resting below. Aids to navigation are impersonal from the water. Inside the tower, their reliability is made from very personal limits, including the useful fact that people need sleep. You hear the clockwork more clearly when the assistant pauses beside it. The sound has changed only because the weight has descended farther and the room is quiet. The interval Kate used for her own winding is approaching again. The assistant does not wait to discover whether every tooth, cable, and bearing will carry the mechanism to its full possible limit. The crank is set, the weight rises, the stored margin begins again under a different pair of hands. This is redundancy in its simplest form. The mechanism has one job, yet two workers understand it. The watch has one current keeper, yet another can return if called. The signal has a primary system, with a bell or manual response available when machinery fails. The log holds memory outside the tired mind. None of those arrangements makes the station immune to damage. They make ordinary failures less likely to become silent ones. A slowing weight is noticed. A smoky wick leaves a mark that someone cleans. A fog signal's condition is checked even in clear weather. The assistant stops winding and confirms the motion. Above, the lamp remains steady. Below, Kate continues resting because the work has been transferred properly. The night does not demand that every competent person be awake at once. It asks that the right person be awake before the weight reaches the bottom. A change in wind sends spray against the tower. You hear it as a brief scatter, followed by the ordinary run of water away from the wall. The assistant checks the lantern glass and the exterior door. No pane is damaged. The ice pattern is different now, thicker on the side that receives the weather. The necessary section is cleared. The assistant returns inside and checks that the gust has not disturbed the flame. The wick remains centered. The lens carries the light outward through the opening made in the frost. Weather at an offshore station changes the amount of labor without changing the goal. The keeper does not defeat winter. The keeper keeps enough glass clear, enough fuel flowing, enough mechanism moving, and enough record to explain what happened. The sea is not a villain in this account. It is the setting that makes the procedure necessary. Kate wakes briefly at the sound of the exterior latch, listens, and recognizes the assistant's normal movement. She does not climb automatically. Shared responsibility includes allowing the worker on watch to handle a routine condition. The latch closes. Footsteps return to the watch position. Kate settles again. Her confidence is practical, not sentimental. She knows the assistant has the tools, the condition, and the authority to act. Above them both, the signal repeats without missing its turn. You remain with the station through the slow middle of the night, when a story is most tempted to invent trouble. Robbins Reef needs none. The assistant wipes a small soot mark before it spreads, checks the oil, and notes the weather. Kate sleeps, the children sleep. The tower holds work on one level and recovery on another. The 1-mile row to shore is impossible to forget even when no boat is moving. It shapes what has been stored, what can be replaced, and how casually a household can decide it wants something from land. Official oil and coal came by service arrangements. Personal needs required a crossing. A winter night therefore begins long before sunset, in the decisions about supplies made when water and weather allowed. That planning is another form of redundancy. A spare chimney matters only if it is already at the station. A clean burner matters only if someone prepared it before the service burner failed. Food, lamp oil, cloths, tools and fuel occupy the same small world, and all must last until the next practical delivery. The assistant closes the oil cap and returns it to its shelf. No emergency has occurred. The station's stored preparation has done its quiet work simply by being available. You hear the mechanism continue. The night is passing not because time alone is kind, but because people arranged for what time would consume. Near the later hours, Kate wakes before she is called. You follow her as she sits and listens. The assistant's steps are regular. The signal mechanism has not stopped. Wind remains present but not alarming. She checks the household fire, then begins to dress for the final portion before sunrise. Her return is part of the schedule described in her later account. She was always up to put the light out at sunrise and then post the log. The assistant's watch does not end the principal keeper's night. It carries the station to the point where she can take the morning work with rested attention. On the stair, Kate meets the assistant coming down for a brief exchange. Again, the condition can be stated plainly. 1 wick trim, ice cleared, mechanism rewound, oil normal, signal ready. No unusual vessel or damage requiring a special report. The assistant has kept the light, not borrowed it. Kate receives the station back through facts and inspection. She climbs to verify the flame herself. At the lantern room, the first change toward dawn is barely visible, more a thinning of black than a color. The lamp still has to burn at full useful intensity until sunrise. Morning light approaching is not permission to extinguish early. Kate stands beside the flame and watches another complete return of the signal. The final watch has begun. You see the difference that rest makes. Kate's hands move without hurry, and her attention goes first to the wick edge, then to the chimney, oil, mechanism and glass. The assistant's report matches what she finds. This agreement is not redundant paperwork. It is confirmation that the handoff worked. A narrow smear of ice remains outside the principal sight line. Kate leaves it. The sun will change the surface soon, and opening the door now would add cold air without improving the service. She cleans one interior mark and checks the mechanism's reserve. The flame has enough fuel to reach sunrise. The clockwork has enough travel because the assistant wound it before necessity. Each person has left the next person time. That is how the night has been made smaller than one unbroken vigil. From the watch position, you can see the harbour gaining shape. Towers and shore lights separate from the darkness. The water remains dark between them. Kate does not treat dawn as a dramatic rescue from night. It is the scheduled point at which one set of duties changes into another. She prepares the tools for extinguishing and morning cleaning but does not begin early. The lamp is still in service. The last minutes receive the same attention as the first, because a schedule that is mostly correct is not the one mariners were promised. Sunrise arrives as a working time rather than a colour in a painting. You watch Kate turn the wicks down slowly, beginning the process without shocking the heated chimney. The flame lowers in stages. Glass that has spent the night hot must not be treated as though it were an ordinary cold cup. The light goes out on schedule. Immediately, another sequence begins. Curtains or protection are arranged as appropriate so magnified daylight will not damage or discolor the lens. The lamp is allowed to cool. The mechanism can be secured for cleaning and preparation. The extinguished lamp does not mean the keeper's work is finished. It means the night watch has produced morning maintenance. Soot that was prevented still leaves traces. Oil use must be measured. Brass touched during adjustments must be cleaned. The lens receives careful attention at its proper interval. Kate opens the lantern room to the growing daylight and inspects the panes she cleared in darkness. Melt has begun along the edges. The scraper, cloths and lamp tools are gathered for cleaning. Below, the assistant can rest. The children and household will soon wake into the same rooms where official work continues. Day has not separated home from station. It has only changed which duties are visible. Kate carries the used cloth downward. The light is out, but the next lighting has already entered her hands. At the work table, you watch Kate total the oil used. Her later account says that the log and monthly reports included the amount consumed and the state of the weather. Federal instructions likewise demanded exact daily quantities, rather than convenient averages. The small difference between measured and guessed matters over a month of nights. She checks the remaining store and compares it with expectation. No unexplained loss appears. A cloth has absorbed a little from the container neck, but the issued quantity and lamp use remain sensible. She records the figure for the formal entry. Weather comes next. Winter cold, ice on lantern glass, wind direction as observed, and visibility belong in concise form. The log is not asked to perform the night again. It is asked to preserve the facts another worker or official may need. Kate also notes the routine work, wick adjustment, early winding, glass clearing, the midnight handoff, and the condition at sunrise. The exact wording is not recoverable, so we keep it paraphrased. What matters is the transformation from repeated action into accountable record. The exhausted night may now become one dry sentence, which is perhaps the logbook's most reliable piece of machinery. It accepts stares, cold hands, oil, and vigilance, then returns a line that looks as though very little happened. Very little did happen. That is the success. You follow Kate back upward with clean cloths for the brass and lamp fittings. Daily cleaning is not a punishment added after a successful night. It is how the station prepares for another one. Finger marks, oil film and soot are easier to remove before they harden into the normal appearance of neglect. She works around the burner and accessible metal using the proper mild abrasive and clean cloth. Federal instructions described whiting and other polishing materials with almost comic seriousness, because grit in the wrong rag can scratch what it is meant to improve. The brass begins to brighten. A fresh fingerprint appears when she shifts the fitting. Kate wipes it away. Brass has the professional habit of displaying evidence against the person currently polishing it. The lamp chimney is cleaned after cooling. Wick condition is checked for the next lighting. The reservoir and feed receive inspection. A spare burner remains ready. Each act belongs to tonight's conclusion and tomorrow's beginning at once. Sunlight now reaches through the lantern glass that was iced during darkness. The lens shows its separate prisms more clearly. Kate does not polish the entire lens every morning. Her later account described that larger job as periodic and lengthy. Today she removes only what routine care requires and leaves the assembly properly protected. When she finishes, the lamp area is orderly, not ornamental. Every tool is returned where the next watch can find it. Downstairs, the household has entered morning. You see how quickly official night work meets breakfast. washing, beds, and children's needs. Kate once told a reporter that she had no time to become lonely because meals, floors, windows, and the lamp all required attention. The statement is retrospective and shaped for print, but the overlap of duties is unmistakable. She does not perform every task alone in this scene. A working household shares what can be shared. The children belong to the station's reality, and the assistant remains an employee with a completed watch, not a shadow waiting to validate the principal keeper. Kate sets the log materials beyond a damp cloth and checks the day's first household need. The official line can wait a few minutes because the facts have already been noted. A bed is straightened, a kettle is managed. The tower changes from night watch to morning home without changing buildings. This is one reason the solitary grizzled keeper is such a poor default image. Many stations were family places. Women held technical responsibility. Children grew within the schedule. Assistants stood watches. The light was federal infrastructure maintained inside human arrangements. Kate returns to the table. The ink is ready. Morning noise remains modest. She begins the formal entry while the household proceeds around her. You watch the pen move across the page. The date, weather, oil, and work are made legible for a monthly report and for anyone who later needs to know the station's condition. Since federal log holdings begin in 1872, we can place this act within a required system without pretending that every surviving book has been digitized or that this exact Robbins Reef line is before us. The entry is concise. Ice was cleared, the light remained in order, the watch changed at midnight. The signal apparatus was ready. Oil use was recorded. No rescue, wreck, or crisis is needed to justify the page. The federal system is distant, but its presence reaches the table through forms, stores, appointments, inspections, and the expectation that the light will show as advertised. Kate's permanent appointment in 1895 recognized work she had already been doing after her husband's death. The signature now belongs to the person responsible. She blots the ink and reviews the quantities. A correction made now is better than a neat error carried into the monthly return. The line remains plain. Outside, the route to Staten Island lies across a mile of morning water. There may be personal supplies to fetch when conditions allow, but not before the station is left properly attended. A lighthouse was never to be abandoned simply because breakfast needed something from shore. Kate closes the book. The night has become accountable. The title question can now be answered without stretching the night into legend. You have watched Kate and the household get through it by repeating a sequence. Inspect the flame, clear the glass, measure oil, rewind early, keep the fog equipment ready, pass the watch to an assistant, return at sunrise, clean the apparatus, and record what occurred. Routine made each task familiar. Redundancy put time in the mechanism, spares near the lamp, and another trained adult on the watch. Shared responsibility allowed one person to rest while another remained attentive. The trustworthy light came from those arrangements, not from a lone figure refusing all human limits. Kate's skill remains central. So does the assistant's watch. So do the children and domestic obligations that shaped the station's working household. The story becomes more accurate, not less impressive, when responsibility is distributed. She places the cleaned tool beside the lamp supplies for the coming evening. Nothing in that action announces completion. It simply leaves the next person less to correct. The harbour is fully visible now. Vessels pass without knowing that ice was scraped twice, or that a weight was raised before it had to be. They receive the result rather than the procedure. At Robbins Reef, that is enough. The light did not disappoint because someone kept making ordinary decisions before disappointment had time to begin. You remain for the small work after the answer. Kate checks that the fog signal remains ready in daylight and notes any maintenance that should be done before weather closes in again. A bell mechanism may need winding or inspection. A siren must be available if visibility falls. Readiness is renewed even when no signal sounded during the night. The assistant sleeps after the late watch. The household arranges the day around that fact. Shared work creates a schedule, and the schedule has consequences in meals, noise, errands, and which adult can leave the station. The 1-mile row is never merely a picturesque detail. Someone must remain with the light. Kate looks at the weather before deciding whether any crossing is sensible. There is no urgent journey in this story. Supplies can be planned. The station's official needs are in order. She checks the log once more and places it where it will remain dry. Records are part of the apparatus in a broader sense. They carry condition forward through time, just as a handoff carries condition from one watch to the next. The morning has become ordinary. That is the bridge we need. A night of repeated skilled work ends not with a rescue boat, but with a closed book, a clean lamp, and a household deciding what can be done before dusk. Before leaving Robbins Reef, you take one last climb with Kate. The lantern room is cooler now. The lamp stands extinguished and prepared. Curtains or covers protect the optic from direct sun. The winding mechanism waits without spending its stored work. She looks through the glass at the route toward shore. Personal errands remain possible only when weather, boat, and staffing agree. The station does not grant a free afternoon because the night ended successfully. Maintenance, housekeeping, records, and preparation occupy daylight. The difference between isolation and loneliness is kept clear. Robbins Reef is physically separate. Supplies are delayed by water. Stairs repeat. Weather arrives without shelter from surrounding land. Yet the station is not empty of people, and Kate's own later words rejected the notion that she had time to sit in dramatic solitude. She touches the cleaned brass only where necessary, and leaves no new mark. The next lighting will begin with order. You descend past the rooms where children grew and assistants rested. The tower has held a federal signal and a family life at once. It has done so through compromise, planning, and labor rather than romance. At the table below, the morning entry dries. It says less than the night contained, which is exactly what a useful log often does. The rowboat remains secured for now. You can see it from the doorway, a practical link to shore rather than an invitation to adventure. Kate will use that mile of water when the station can spare her and conditions allow. Until then, the household works with what it has. A service supply vessel brought basic requirements, such as coal and oil on its schedule, while personal goods required local effort. That division explains the careful stores inside the tower. It also explains why a missing wick, broken chimney, or empty household tin cannot be treated as a minor shopping inconvenience. Kate checks the fastening and closes the door against the cold. The outside world is close enough to see and far enough to plan around. Behind her, the assistant's completed watch has created rest. The children move through morning routines. The lamp is clean. The fog equipment is ready. The log is posted. No person in the household is carrying the whole station at this moment, although Kate remains accountable for the whole. That is the final ordinary image of the title story. A door closes, not against the world, but to keep the warmth and work arranged until the next necessary crossing. The dependable night is over. The dependable evening has already begun in preparation. You leave Robbins Reef with the answer settled. The mechanism was impressive enough, the harbour broad enough, and the winter glass cold enough. None of those things explains reliability by itself. Reliability came from a sequence that could be taught, checked, shared, and written down. Kate arrived as an assistant, learnt the station beside her husband, carried the principal work after his death, and received the permanent appointment in 1895. Her career demonstrates professional competence, but this one night demonstrates something quieter. She did not prove herself by refusing assistance. She made assistance part of the light's dependable operation. The assistant's midnight watch, the children's presence, the planned stores, the early winding, and the sunrise log all belong to the same system. A family station was not a private home with a lighthouse attached as decoration. It was infrastructure lived inside. The morning entry remains on the table. The lamp waits above. The boat waits at the doorway. The next story will move across the continent to a station whose machinery is documented in unusual detail. For now, keep the simplest fact. Someone woke before the weight reached the bottom, noticed what smoke and ice were doing, handed the watch to another person, and left a record for the people who would come after. At Point Reyes, the first thing you carry down is not the great lens. It is yourself, step after step, from the keeper's quarters toward a lighthouse set below the high fog on the California headland. The adult assistant beginning this 6-hour watch is not given a new name, because the documented staff matters more than an invented personality. A head keeper and 3 assistants shared the station in 4 6-hour shifts. Half an hour before sunset, you go with the assistant toward the oil lamp. The first-order Fresnel lens surrounds the source in tall ranks of glass. Its assembly weighs about 6,000 pounds. That number is specific to Point Reyes, just as the staircase, wind, staff, and clockwork are specific to this station. The ordinary goal is clear. Light the lamp, set the optic turning, keep the 5-second flash characteristic dependable, and hand the apparatus to the next keeper at the end of the shift. The assistant checks the burner before flame enters the room. Wick, oil, chimney, draft, and alignment come first. The lens can bend and concentrate the lamp's light, but it cannot make a neglected flame better by admiration. Outside, wind presses along the building. Inside, the assistant opens the oil supply and prepares to light the inner wick. The large machinery waits for a very small flame to begin its work. You watch the lamp come alive gradually. The assistant lights the wick low, allows the chimney to warm, and raises the flame by degrees. Federal instructions warned against sudden heating and cooling, because glass and metal respond poorly to haste. The working flame must be clear and steady, not simply tall. The source is oil burning on wick. Around it, the Fresnel lens arranges prisms to bend the light into concentrated beams. Point Reyes has 24 vertical panels, and as the lens turns, those beams sweep the horizon. The apparent flash is created when each beam passes an observer. At this station, the intended result is 1 flash every 5 seconds. The assistant checks the color of the flame and the position of the chimney. A reddish or smoky flame can indicate poor draft or wrong adjustment. A flame raised beyond clean burning creates soot, and soot turns a marvel of optics into a very expensive surface waiting to be cleaned. The lamp reaches full useful intensity. You can now separate the jobs. Fuel produces the flame. Wick and draft shape it. The lens directs it. Clockwork will move the lens. A keeper keeps all 4 relationships in order. The assistant looks once through the glass, then turns toward the winding mechanism. The 6,000-pound optic is ready to move, but gravity must first be given something to spend. At Point Reyes, the driving weight is documented at 170 pounds. You see the assistant fit the crank and begin lifting it. Hemp rope connects the weight to the mechanism. The weight rises 9 feet from the floor, then will descend through a small opening toward the ground level 17 feet below. The figures belong here and nowhere else. Cape Hatteras had a different tower, drop, weights, and winding routine. Robbins Reef had Kate Walker's reported intervals. Point Reyes gives us this particular arrangement: a 170-pound weight, a 17-foot descent, and 2 hours and 20 minutes before rewinding. The crank resists. The assistant continues until the weight reaches its proper height. Gears hold and regulate the stored pull. When released, gravity turns the clockwork at a controlled pace, rather than allowing the weight to fall freely. A gentle push helps the great lens begin moving. Once underway, the assembly turns once every 2 minutes. 6,000 pounds of glass and metal move with such steadiness that the effort seems to disappear. It has not disappeared. It has moved into the raised weight, geared resistance, careful lubrication, and the keeper who will return before the descent is finished. The assistant removes the crank from danger and watches the first full revolution. The mechanism has accepted the watch. You stand beside the assistant and count the characteristic without making the counting anxious. A bright passage reaches the window. 5 seconds later, another follows. The lens completes its 2-minute revolution, while 24 panels carry beams around the horizon. A lighthouse characteristic is an identity written in time. Mariners compare the observed flash or sound pattern with what they expect from a chart or local knowledge. The keeper therefore tends more than brightness. The rate and regularity of rotation matter. The assistant listens to the gears. An uneven click might reveal dirt, wear, poor lubrication, or a rope problem before the flash pattern visibly changes. The 1888 station log shows keepers overhauling lens machinery, changing ropes, repairing burners, and cleaning clockwork. Those entries are evidence of a system that required maintenance between moments of apparent perfection. The lens turns smoothly now. The assistant checks the governor, the regulating part that controls speed, then returns attention to the lamp. The wick has warmed evenly. No smoke marks the chimney. The first half hour is busy because every component is establishing its night condition. After that, the watch does not become empty. It becomes repetitive. Point Reyes has arranged a rather grand machine to produce one small promise every 5 seconds. The assistant's job is to make sure the machine does not become impressed with itself. The wind outside deserves respect, but not a villain's role. You hear it along the lantern and in the stair structure. Point Reyes is known for strong wind and frequent fog, and the lighthouse was positioned below the high fog layer. The exposed climb between quarters and tower could be difficult enough that keepers sometimes had to go low against the gusts. Inside, the assistant checks whether pressure changes have altered the flame. Ventilators are adjusted according to conditions, but not every sound requires a hand on a control. The flame stays white and steady. It receives no correction. The keeper then looks at the oil feed. Fuel must flow freely through clean passages. Lint or dirt can obstruct a float or valve, which is why official instructions required regular examination and careful cleaning with materials that would not damage the seat. Everything is in order. The assistant wipes one small trace of oil and returns the cloth to a safe container. A lamp room combines open flame, fuel, hot glass, and moving machinery. Neatness is not a preference for appearances. It is a method of reducing hazards and finding faults. Another flash passes, then another. You feel the shift settle into its long middle, governed by the descending weight below and the flame at its focus. The first rewind is less than 2 hours away. You follow the assistant down one level to inspect the clockwork from another angle. The weight's descent is slow enough to be almost invisible in a glance. Its progress becomes clear only by comparison with the mark or position remembered from earlier. The rope runs cleanly. Gears turn with the expected sound. The assistant checks lubrication points without flooding them. Too little oil increases friction. Too much can carry dirt or reach a surface where it does not belong. Skilled maintenance often lives between two kinds of excess. The 1888 Reyes log records days spent cleaning clock machinery, replacing tower machine rope, changing burners, washing lantern glass, and receiving inspection. The work appears in terse lines because the log was an operating record, not a narrative performance. Yet those lines let you see why the mechanism moves tonight. It was maintained on other days by people whose names shared the staff list. The assistant returns to the lamp. The flash remains regular. A keeper at sea would see only the result. You have seen the rope, weight, gear, governor, lamp, and human checks that create it. While the weight continues downward, it is dependable precisely because nobody mistakes slow movement for endless movement. A faint dark edge develops on one wick. You see the assistant notice it before the chimney shows a soot band. The flame is lowered. The hot chimney is handled with its protective cloth, and the wick is trimmed in place with as little disturbance as possible. The cut is small. A jagged wick edge can make a flame uneven, and an uneven flame can smoke. Smoke dulls glass and wastes fuel. The assistant clears the char, restores the chimney carefully, and raises the flame in stages. For several seconds the light is lower, but the procedure prevents a larger loss later. A spare burner stands ready if the service burner develops a fault that cannot be corrected quickly. Redundancy waits quietly on the shelf. The flame returns to its proper height and color. The assistant checks that the burner remains centered at the lens focus. A beautifully clean Fresnel lens pointed around a poorly placed source would concentrate the wrong geometry with great precision. You watch 3 flashes pass. Their interval is unchanged. The clockwork has continued while the lamp received attention. One system supported the other long enough for a keeper to act. The assistant wipes the tool and sets it back. The wick has lost a fraction of material. The night has gained another stretch of steady burning. Fog has not fully closed the station, but damp air thickens beyond the glass. You follow the assistant's attention toward the signal building. At Point Reyes, fog signals were essential because light could not help a vessel that could not see it. The station's log records long periods when the siren was in use, along with repairs to boilers, valves, governors, belts, and pipes. This shift does not borrow a dramatic breakdown from a different date. The assistant confirms readiness. The steam-powered apparatus belongs to a larger round of coal, water, fire, oiling, and mechanical inspection. When not operating, the machinery still demanded cleaning and protection. The head keeper and assistants shared that work as well as the tower watches. A 6-hour shift therefore sits inside a full station schedule of repairs, supplies, painting, cleaning, and signal duty. You return with the assistant to the lantern. The flame remains clear. The lens continues its rotation. Moisture beads on the outside without obscuring the beam. The fog signal may be called into service later, but the keeper does not wait for blindness to discover whether a valve moves. Readiness is built before urgency. Another 5-second flash passes into air that is becoming harder to see through. The lamp and signal wait as complementary tools, each with its own machinery and its own human labor. The first 2-hour and 20-minute descent approaches its end. You hear no alarm. The assistant knows the interval and checks the weight before it can reach the bottom. The crank is fitted again. Raising 170 pounds through the mechanism is work, even when gearing makes it manageable. The assistant turns steadily. A person who delays too long would have to correct a slowing or stopped rotation before restoring the characteristic. Winding on schedule avoids that sequence. The weight rises. The rope coils properly. The governor and gears continue controlling the lens as the energy reserve is renewed. The assistant stops at the correct height, secures the crank, and confirms motion. This documented interval is one reason lighthouse machinery cannot be generalized carelessly. Another station might run longer because its tower allowed a deeper drop or its weights and gearing differed. Point Reyes asks for this return every 2 hours and 20 minutes through the night. The assistant notes the winding time. On a 6-hour watch, the task will come more than once. The shift is not a single launch of machinery followed by contemplation. It is a set of recurring appointments with gravity. The mechanism sounds unchanged after winding. The flashes continue. A large lens has been kept moving by an adult who arrived before a comparatively small weight ran out of room. You climb the interior stair toward the lantern again. Outside, the exposed wooden stairs back toward the quarters wait for the end of the shift. For now, the assistant remains in the watchroom, where federal expectations required continuous attention to the light. The lens panels pass in measured succession. Close up, their mass is obvious. 6,000 pounds must be supported, kept level, lubricated, and turned at constant speed. The fact that a raised weight can drive it feels elegant. The fact that a keeper must rewind the weight twice or more during one shift feels more useful. The assistant cleans a small spot on the lantern glass. Daytime crews undertook broader lens cleaning and brass polishing, but night watch still corrected anything that reduced service. A clean cloth touches glass gently. Grit has no place here. The oil level is checked against the expected burn. No unexplained drop appears. The assistant makes no adjustment, simply to demonstrate attentiveness. The best possible light is already burning. Wind strikes the structure in a long pressure, then eases. The gears remain even. The assistant watches the next flash and settles back into the chair or standing position that keeps the lamp in view. The watch has passed its first major cycle. Nothing has failed because maintenance and attention have prevented ordinary changes from accumulating. A station log from 1888 gives you a glimpse of Point Reyes beyond this single watch. Keepers repaired lamp burners, cleaned the lens, overhauled clock machinery, replaced rope, handled mineral oil, put down coal, and recorded signal use. Inspectors arrived, looked over the station, and left judgments that could fit into a line. The modern evidence is brief. You return immediately to the assistant, who hears a slightly sharper tick from the mechanism and checks it. The sound proves to be ordinary resonance from the current position of the gear train, not a fault. The assistant leaves the housing closed. This is a skilled refusal to create unnecessary work. A keeper must know the apparatus well enough to distinguish change from danger. Official instructions told keepers to learn every detail from machinists and lampists, because ignorance would not excuse neglect. The assistant's knowledge is practical. It comes from previous watches, maintenance days, and the head keeper's supervision. Shared responsibility does not mean interchangeable in experience. It means several people are trained to carry the same essential condition forward. You count the 5-second interval again. The pattern is steady. The assistant looks at the weight mark and estimates the next winding. The great mechanism continues. Its most important feature is not that it can move without a hand every second, but that it tells a trained hand when to return. The lamp asks for another small adjustment. You see the flame begin to lean under a shift in draft. The assistant changes the ventilator opening on the leeward side, waits, and watches the flame straighten. No wick is cut, because the wick is not the cause. Cause matters. Trimming a good wick to solve a draft problem would shorten the wick and leave the draft problem untouched. Cleaning a lens to solve slow clockwork would produce excellent glass around the wrong flash rate. Each symptom has to be traced to the part that can create it. The assistant allows several flashes to pass before deciding the adjustment is stable. The chimney remains clear. Oil flow is normal. The lens continues its 2-minute revolution. Outside, fog and wind alter the station's surroundings without changing the internal question. Is the source steady? Is the optic moving correctly? And is the characteristic reaching outward as intended? The assistant writes a brief note on the draft adjustment. It may not deserve a daily journal line if nothing further occurs, but it belongs in the watch's working memory. The lamp burns cleanly again. One control moved a small distance. The 6,000-pound lens never noticed, which is exactly the arrangement the keeper wanted. Halfway through the 6-hour shift, you can feel why the station used 4 watches rather than asking one adult to remain in the tower all night. Attention has a texture. It can become smooth enough that a repeated flash no longer feels like information. The schedule counters that human tendency with relief. The assistant stands and makes a full round. Flame, chimney, oil, lens motion, gear sound, weight position, lantern glass, signal readiness, weather. Each item interrupts familiarity before familiarity becomes blindness. The head keeper is not absent from the story merely because another adult holds this watch. He has organized the staff, assigned work, and will take his own share. Other assistants have handled earlier or later duties. The light belongs to the station crew. A cow, kitchen repair, family arrivals, illnesses, and personnel changes appear in the surviving Point Reyes log alongside machinery. The station was a workplace where people lived, not a machine abandoned on a cliff between inspections. You return to the lamp. The assistant trims no wick, adds no oil, and moves no control. The round confirms that the system should be left alone. Another flash crosses the glass. The watch has been renewed by attention rather than alteration. The second rewind arrives. You follow the assistant to the crank before the weight completes its 2-hour and 20-minute descent. The first winding did not make this one optional. Gravity has continued its honest accounting. The assistant raises the weight again. Muscles, crank, gears, rope and iron cooperate. The mechanism stores enough work for another interval, no more. A lighthouse clockwork is impressive partly because it makes a limit predictable. The assistant checks the rope for wear as it coils. The Point Reyes log records replacement of tower machine rope, evidence that this humble connection mattered to the enormous optic. Glass receives attention because it is visible. Rope deserves attention because it carries the weight. When the winding is complete, the assistant confirms that the rotation has not changed. One revolution in 2 minutes still sends a beam past every 5 seconds. The characteristic is the measurable payoff of correct work below. You stand for a moment beside the raised weight. It will begin descending as soon as the mechanism spends it. There is no victory over gravity here. There is a schedule made from gravity's reliability. The crank is returned to its place. The assistant goes back to the lamp, leaving the iron weight to perform its slow part until a person returns again. The fog thickens enough that the signal becomes part of the active watch. You move with the assistant toward the machinery while another staff member shares or assumes the specific signal duty according to the station arrangement. The story remains about coordinated work, not one adult running every system alone. Steam, valves, governors, and the siren require preparation and inspection. The 1888 log shows how often these parts demanded repair. A fog signal could be operating well one day and need a gasket, pin, belt, or pipe the next. Its pattern had to identify the station through sound. The assistant confirms the tower light, while the signal begins its prescribed operation. Light and sound now work together under separate checks. Fog makes the beam less useful at distance, but the lamp is not extinguished. Weather can shift, and nearby visibility may differ. You return to the lantern after the signal settles. The flash still arrives every 5 seconds. The flame is steady. The added machinery has increased workload without changing the purpose. The person at sea may hear the station before seeing it. Inside, keepers hear whether the signal itself is healthy. The night's redundancy has become audible. Hours of wind and signal work leave fine residue on surfaces. You watch the assistant wipe the lamp area and check the chimney again. Soot is minimal because the wick has been kept clean. The lens is not magically bright. It remains useful because the source and glass have been maintained. The assistant looks through an opening between panels and checks the lantern glass for condensation. Moisture is removed where it interferes. The cloth is changed before dirt can be spread from one surface to another. At Point Reyes, daytime duty included cleaning the lens, polishing brass, tending the steam fog signal, and making repairs. Night watch and daytime maintenance are therefore one continuous cycle. The clean mechanism at sunset is the product of morning work. The morning work will be shaped by what tonight has used. You hear the fog signal continue. A staff member checks its rhythm and working condition. The assistant at the lamp keeps the flash characteristic under observation. Separate adults hold related responsibilities. The station is busy now, but the narration does not need to rise with the sound. Each person has a defined next action. Check, wipe, listen, record, rewind when due, hand over when the shift ends. The light passes again through clean glass. The shift's last hour begins. You follow the assistant through another complete round, now with the knowledge that relief is approaching. Fatigue can encourage a worker to treat the final checks as formalities. The schedule requires the opposite. The next keeper needs an accurate condition, not an optimistic one. The flame is even. Oil remains sufficient. The lens rotation is constant. The weight has safe travel. The fog signal is operating, and its condition must be included in the handoff. Wind remains strong on the exposed climb. The assistant notes the time and any adjustments made. Wick trimmed once, draft altered, 2 rewinds completed, fog signal active. Exact wording stays out of the narration because we are not holding this individual's watchbook. The documented procedures tell us what the book was meant to contain. Another keeper begins the descent from the quarters or finishes work at the signal building, preparing to take the mechanism in hand. Relief at a staffed station is an operation, not a disappearance. You stay beside the assistant for several more flashes. The pattern remains correct. The shift is nearly complete, but the light does not know that. It continues asking for the same attention. The next keeper arrives in the lantern room and looks first at the lamp. You watch the handoff repeat the logic seen at Robbins Reef. Though the machinery is different, condition is stated, then verified. The source flame is steady. The burner is centered. The clockwork has been wound with ample travel. The lens turns once every 2 minutes. The 5-second flash is regular. The fog signal is in use and reported in working order. No supply or mechanical fault is concealed for the sake of an easier relief. The incoming keeper listens to the gear train and watches a full sequence. A hand goes to the winding crank, not to turn it immediately, but to confirm where it is and how soon it will be needed. The outgoing assistant signs off according to station practice. 6 hours of work become a compact record. The next adult now owns the watch. This is the payoff at Point Reyes. A 170-pound weight can move a 6,000-pound lens through ingenious gearing, but the reliable characteristic passes from person to person. The mechanism extends human effort. It does not replace human relief. You turn with the assistant toward the door. Behind you, the next keeper remains beside the lamp. The climb back through the wind is the assistant's final task in this story. You step onto the exposed stairs and feel why the station's location shaped every watch change. Strong gusts can force a person low, making the return to quarters a deliberate movement rather than a casual walk. The assistant grips the rail and climbs. The lighthouse is below the high ground, positioned for its work beneath frequent fog. That placement means each shift begins and ends with the same long negotiation between cliff, stair, and weather. No machinery follows up the steps. The weight continues descending. The lens continues turning. The incoming keeper continues watching. Work remains below, while one adult leaves it in another adult's hands. Halfway up, you hear the fog signal through the damp air. Its pattern confirms that the signal crew is still attending it. A flash may be hidden from this angle, then return as the lens turns. The assistant reaches the shelter of the upper path. 6 hours have ended without a crisis, and the station's larger day continues. That ordinary continuity is the earned closing image. Down in the lantern, another keeper checks the flame and looks at the weight. The mechanism has been taken in hand. You follow the outgoing assistant into the workroom where the day's quieter maintenance waits in plain sight. A lamp does not remain dependable merely because its great lens turns. The burner needs attention. The mineral oil must be carried, measured, and stored. The lantern glass must be kept clear. The gears need cleaning and oiling, and any small irregularity has to be noticed before darkness makes it urgent. At Point Reyes, the impressive machinery occupies the center of the lantern, but the dependable part of the system is distributed among 4 adults who know what to look for. The outgoing keeper can report that the flame burned evenly, the fog remained absent, and the weight was wound before the end of each descent. That report is useful because the next person does not begin from ignorance. He begins with a mechanism already observed by someone who has just spent 6 hours close to it. The head keeper can compare the condition of the clockwork with the station's records, arrange cleaning or repair, and set the work in order before another evening. You notice how little of this resembles one man conquering the night. The station is closer to a relay in which no one may drop the ordinary object being passed. At sunset, one keeper lit and adjusted the lamp. Through the dark, others wound, trimmed, watched, and listened. By daylight, still more work removes the soot and salt that the night has left behind. The lens may weigh 6,000 pounds, but trust rests on a sequence of human hands. By the time you look back from the upper path, the lantern has become a pale structure against the morning sky. The flash is no longer needed, yet the mechanism has not become irrelevant. It will be cleaned, checked, and prepared for the next lighting. The next watch will begin with the benefit of what the previous watch noticed, and the next keeper will take responsibility before the iron weight can turn elapsed minutes into a stopped lens. That is the answer carried out of Point Reyes. A characteristic signal was made by gears, panels, flame, and a descending weight, but it endured through the night because several people divided the labor and inherited one another's observations. The 6-hour shift was not a sealed adventure. It was one portion of a station day in which a head keeper and 3 assistants shared both the machinery and the consequences of neglect. You leave the western headland with the sound of wind still moving around the tower. Far across the continent, and several decades earlier, another light station stands on a low main rock. Its towers are smaller in the mind than the great lens you have just left, but the work there also travels from one pair of hands to another. A young woman has learnt the lamps before she is asked to depend on that knowledge. Her father must cross for provisions. Inside the dwelling, an ill mother, younger children, stored oil, and a group of hens all belong to the same practical calculation. You arrive at Matinicus Rock in the 1850s with Abbie Burgess already moving between the dwelling and the 2 light towers. She is still a teenager, but the lamps are not mysterious objects kept beyond the reach of family life. Her father, Samuel Burgess, is the keeper, and he has taught her how each light must be prepared. She knows where the oil is stored, how the wicks are trimmed, how the glass is cleaned, and how the 2 towers differ in the sequence of a working day. The rock lies well off the main coast. A trip for provisions is therefore not an errand folded casually into an afternoon. It depends on a boat, weather, distance, and the chance of returning with what the household needs. That distance gives ordinary stores unusual importance. Food, lamp supplies, medicine, and feed for the hens are all counted against the same uncertainty. When one category runs low, the whole household feels the decision. You follow Abbie as she checks the lamps before her father leaves for the mainland. Her goal is not to become the heroine of a storm. It is to know that both lights can be kept, the family fed, and her ill mother spared work she cannot manage. The question is practical. Can knowledge learned through repeated assistance carry a household through the keeper's absence? Abbie begins answering it by lifting a lamp component into the light and looking for what the last burning has left behind. The wick tells you something before the lamp is filled. Its edge must be even enough to produce a steady flame, and the blackened portion cannot simply be ignored. Abbie trims it with the care of someone who has seen a poor edge smoke against clean glass. She does not need a speech about responsibility. The soot has already supplied one, in a handwriting that appears on every surface nearby. You move with her to the oil. Filling the lamps is repetitive and exacting because too little fuel risks the light, while careless handling creates its own work. The vessels must be carried without wasting what may not be easily replaced. The lamps in the twin towers are separate obligations. Finishing one does not make the other sympathetic. It waits with the patience of an object that has never carried oil upstairs itself. Back at the dwelling, the hens press their own claim on the supply calculation. They provide eggs, and their feed therefore belongs to the practical economy of the station. A hen is not much interested in federal illumination, but it remains a determined participant in household accounting. This is the story's one gentle absurdity, and Abbie has no time to admire it. She checks the stores, considers what her father may be able to bring back, and returns to the glass that must be clear before evening. You stand beside Abbie while she cleans one lens and then the other. The work is close and unglamorous. Smoke from an oil flame deposits itself where light is meant to pass. Salt carried through the station air settles on surfaces. A fingerprint can remain exactly where a careful hand has just improved matters. Cleaning is therefore not an ornament to lighthouse duty. It is part of making the lamp's available light useful. Her father has shown her how to recognize the proper condition of the apparatus. but instruction becomes competence only through repetition. Abbie has already made these movements on ordinary days when another adult was present. She has filled, trimmed, wiped, and checked under circumstances that did not seem historic. Those days matter now because the next decision does not have to be invented. You follow her from the first tower to the second. Between them, the rock and the dwelling remain visible, along with the family whose needs are folded into her watch. Her mother is unwell. Younger siblings need food and reassurance. The lamps require attendance at their appointed times. None of these duties politely waits for the others to finish. Abbie organizes them by sequence, doing what must be done before lighting, what can be done after, and what another member of the family can safely carry or fetch. When Samuel Burgess prepares to cross for provisions, you can see why the decision is necessary without turning it into a dramatic departure. The station depends on stores brought from elsewhere. The delayed supply run can narrow the household's choices, especially when weather has already made travel uncertain. He leaves because food and other necessities cannot be created on the rock, and because the lamps will remain in hands he has trained. Abbie watches the boat diminish, then turns back toward work. The useful fact is not that she feels no concern. The useful fact is that concern does not replace the schedule. She checks the household first, making certain her mother is settled and the younger children understand what needs doing. Then she returns to the towers before evening takes away the easy light for cleaning and preparation. You notice that the station's family structure is not separate from its official purpose. The dwelling supplies labor, observation, memory, and continuity. Abbie's knowledge has grown because she lived beside the apparatus and repeatedly assisted with it. Her siblings can carry small things, tend the hens, or remain near their mother. The household divides what can be divided. The duties that require Abbie's trained hands remain hers. By late afternoon, both lamps are prepared, the stores have been reviewed, and the first night without her father present is becoming a sequence rather than a blank space. You climb with Abbie as the light outside begins to thin. In each tower, she approaches the lamp in the same order she has practiced. Fuel is present, the wick is ready, the glass is clear. The surrounding apparatus has no obvious defect. Only after these checks does lighting become the next action rather than a hopeful gesture. The two flames do not transform the rock into safety. They perform a narrower and more useful service by giving mariners the expected lights. Abbie adjusts them and remains long enough to see how each burns. An uneven edge or a trace of smoke would call her back to the wick. A clear flame allows her to move to the next obligation, but not to forget the first. Down in the dwelling, your attention follows her to supper, medicine, and the younger children. The lamps continue above, while the family continues below. That simultaneous life is central to the station. Lighthouse work is not conducted in a separate heroic chamber, while domestic work waits out of sight. The same person may move from a lamp to a sickbed, from a store cupboard to a tower stair, carrying the last task in mind while beginning the next. Abbie listens for changes in the weather, checks what remains of the provisions, and plans when she must return to each light. The first night passes by repeated returns. You go back up with Abbie, not because a crisis has announced itself, but because oil lamps need watching. A flame can change as a wick burns. Soot can begin where there was none. Fuel levels fall. The person responsible for a light learns to look before a small change becomes a failed signal. Matt Pulmberibos near a lamp, then crosses to the other tower. The route between them becomes part of the watch, along with doors, steps, and the exposed space of the rock. She carries only what is needed, preserving balance and keeping one hand free where the way demands it. Inside each tower, the flame offers evidence. A steady burn means the preparation was sound. A slight correction means the watch is doing its job. You return with her to the dwelling after each circuit. Her mother and siblings are still there, and their needs have not become less real because the lamps are burning. Abbie checks the room, the stores, and the sound of the weather. She rests when she can, but the rest is bounded by the next visit to the towers. The night is not defeated. It is divided into manageable portions, each ending with a lamp observed and a household still in order. Morning does not release you from the lamps. When the appointed time comes and daylight can carry the work, Abbie extinguishes each flame and begins dealing with what the night has produced. The lamps need refilling, the burned wicks need attention, the glass must be inspected for smoke. What looked clear before lighting may now hold a grey trace that will matter when darkness returns. You see why a keeper's skill is built in the morning as much as at night. Abbie can compare the condition of the two lamps. If one wick has charred more unevenly, she can trim it differently. If one pane shows more soot, she can examine the flame setting and the way air reaches the burner. The next night's reliability begins with these small judgments made in daylight. There is also breakfast, care for her mother, and the distribution of what food remains. The younger children can help with household tasks, but Abbie must decide how to fit those tasks around the lamps. She does not treat the family as an interruption to lighthouse work, nor the lighthouse as an interruption to family. Both belong to the same morning. When the cleaning is done, she sets the apparatus in readiness, then returns to the dwelling with time measured by meals, medicine, weather, and the next lighting. You remain on the rock as the weather closes the route her father must use. The severe storm remembered from 1856 enters the story as a practical fact rather than a spectacle. Wind and water delay supplies and make the exposed parts of the station harder to cross. Abbie cannot shorten the distance to the mainland. She can only manage what is present. The first decision is to protect life and useful stores. Her mother and siblings remain in the safest available part of the dwelling. Food is counted more carefully. The hens, valuable because they provide eggs, cannot be left entirely to a shelter that may not withstand the weather. Abbie brings them into greater protection as conditions require, accepting the additional mess because the alternative would reduce the household's food. Through this, you follow her back to the lamps. The storm does not suspend the expectation that the lights burn. It increases the importance of preparation because every trip between dwelling and tower now costs more effort. Abbie carries what she needs, closes doors behind her, and checks both flames. She makes no theatrical stand against the weather. She performs the same learned sequence under less convenient conditions, then returns to the family with the knowledge that both lights are still doing their appointed work. Her younger siblings also become part of the station's timing without being asked to perform work beyond their ability. One can remain near their mother while Abbie climbs. Another can bring a dry cloth to the doorway or report that a meal is ready. These are modest contributions, but they keep Abbie from choosing between two necessary places without information. She still tends the lamps herself. The family makes that trained work possible by holding the smaller domestic tasks in place. The stores become a daily arithmetic you can see in Abbie's hands. A measure of meal leaves the container. A little lamp oil moves from storage toward the towers. Feed goes to the hens because eggs may extend the household's food. Medicine is kept for the person who needs it. Each transfer reduces what remains, and the weather offers no firm date for replacement. Abbie's choices are conservative without being passive. She does not starve the lamps to preserve household oil, nor empty the food stores as though a boat were certain tomorrow. She keeps the official duty and the family duty visible together. The lamps must be filled enough to burn properly. The household must be fed enough to continue its work. Waste in either place would be felt in the other. You go with her through another cycle of cleaning and lighting. Repetition gives her a way to judge whether consumption is ordinary. The amount a lamp takes, the condition of a wick, and the soot left on glass are not abstract data. They tell her whether the apparatus is behaving as expected. That knowledge helps her preserve supplies without guessing. It also keeps the night from becoming one large uncertainty. There is the first lamp, the second lamp, the family meal, the next check, and the stores remaining after each. You can hear the difference between weather and failure. Wind against the station is not proof that a lamp has gone out. A hard gust at a door is not a signal from the tower. Abbie has to avoid both careless confidence and exhausting alarm. She checks on a schedule and returns sooner when a particular change gives her reason. Inside the first tower, the lamp burns. She studies the flame long enough to be certain, then examines the glass for smoke. In the second, she repeats the same attention. The two lights demand separate confirmation because one successful check cannot stand for both. This is how routine produces redundancy. 2 lamps, 2 towers, repeated visits, and a household that knows where Abbie is going all create more than one chance to notice a problem. Back below, you see the quieter redundancy of family work. A sibling can report that their mother needs something. Another can tend a small domestic task while Abbie is away. No one becomes an interchangeable keeper merely by being present, but each person can support the sequence according to age and ability. The family gets through the night not by pretending every duty belongs to one heroic individual, but by making sure the right person can reach the right task at the right time. The storm's long hours leave marks that must be handled in daylight. You follow Abbie as she examines doors, paths, and the condition of the hen's shelter. Anything moved for protection has to be placed where it will not block the next trip. Wet clothing must be dried if possible. Lamp tools must remain clean and findable. The household cannot afford to let one difficult night disorder every night that follows. Abbie distortions the work in small stages. She cleans the lenses, trims the wicks, and fills the lamps. Then she returns to food and care. The order is not rigid for its own sake. It prevents a necessary step from disappearing beneath the louder demands of weather. A lamp prepared early gives her room to respond to her mother later. A meal settled before dusk leaves both towers easier to attend. You notice that competence here has no single dramatic moment. It accumulates through decisions that preserve tomorrow's choices. Abbie does not use all the dry fuel at once. She does not leave a dirty lens because it still passed some light last night. She does not postpone the second tower because the first looked sound. Every completed task narrows the chance that fatigue, weather, or scarcity will combine into a larger failure. By afternoon, the station is again arranged around the coming dark. When evening returns, you no longer need every action explained. Abbie enters the first tower with the prepared lamp before her. She lights, adjusts, and watches. She crosses to the second, repeats the sequence, and looks back only after the flame has settled. The rhythm has become familiar without becoming careless. That distinction matters. Repetition can dull attention when a task is treated as automatic, but it can also sharpen attention by making differences visible. Abbie knows what a normal flame looks like because she has seen it many times. She knows how clean glass should appear because she cleaned it herself. A change stands out against the pattern. Routine is not the absence of thought. It is a structure that directs thought toward the thing that has changed. You descend with her into another night of family care and lamp checks. The weather still controls travel, and the stores remain limited. Yet the essential work is no longer presented as a question of whether one young person can perform a miracle. She has already shown what sustains the station. Training received before the absence, duties divided within the household, supplies counted, and each light treated as a separate promise that must be renewed after dark. Before she leaves the second tower, Abbie checks the tools she will need at the next visit and places them in their usual order. That small preparation preserves attention for the flame itself when she returns. In the dwelling, she tells the family by her actions when the next circuit will begin. Food is covered, a vessel is set ready, and the path to the door remains clear. The station's rhythm is visible even without a clock announced aloud. You stay close to the ordinary signs that a supply route may reopen. The wind changes. Visibility improves. Water that had made a crossing unreasonable begins to offer a usable interval. None of this guarantees an immediate arrival, so Abbie continues as before. She does not spend tomorrow's provisions because the horizon looks kinder today. The lamps are prepared in daylight. Her mother is cared for. The children eat from what remains. The hens are fed because their usefulness has not ended with the worst weather. Each action keeps the household able to receive help without depending on its exact hour. When a boat can finally approach, it will bring supplies into a station that is still functioning, not rescue an abandoned routine. You accompany Abbie on another inspection of both towers. She sees the evidence of her own consistency in clean glass, serviceable wicks, and fuel used at a rate she understands. The lamps have not remained trustworthy by luck. They have been made ready, lit, watched, extinguished, cleaned, and made ready again. That repeating circle is the practical achievement of the story. The severe weather matters because it lengthened the period in which the family had to rely on its own knowledge. It does not replace the knowledge as the center of attention. When Samuel Burgess is able to return, you see the crossing from the station side. The boat carries the provisions that distance and weather had delayed. Food, lamp needs, medicine, and household stores can be replenished. The arrival changes the calculation in the cupboards, but it does not erase the work already done. Abbie has kept both lights and the household through his absence. That statement is sometimes compressed into a tale of youthful courage, and courage is certainly present, yet the more useful explanation lies in what came before. Her father had taught her the lamps. She had practiced the tasks while the station was functioning normally. She knew the family, the stores, the towers, and the order of work. When the crossing became impossible, she did not have to invent a lighthouse service from memory. She continued one. You help carry the story no farther than the evidence requires. There is no need for a dramatic speech when the condition of the station gives its own account. The lamps are prepared. The family is present. The stores are low but managed. The hens have survived in greater shelter. The repeated practical choices are visible in what has not been lost. Supplies come ashore, and the household's range of choices widens again. The next night still requires lighting. You follow Abbie through the familiar preparation, even though her father is back. Responsibility can be handed over, but knowledge does not vanish when another trained person returns. She remains part of the working household, able to assist, observe, and take a watch because the family has learnt that her skill is real. One lamp is filled, one wick is trimmed, one lens is wiped clear. Then the second tower receives the same attention. The sequence that carried the family through the absence now returns to its ordinary scale. That return is the payoff. A difficult period has not transformed Abbie into a figure outside daily life. It has confirmed the value of daily practice. You look from one tower to the other as the lights begin their work. Their twin presence is produced by separate acts, not by a general intention to keep a lighthouse. Each flame has fuel, each wick has been shaped, each lens has been cleaned, each has been checked by someone who knows what a steady burn should look like. Family labor and official purpose meet at those details. The station's continuity belongs to all the hands that can perform them reliably. In the morning, you descend with Abbie after the lamps are extinguished. The rock has resumed its usual mixture of isolation and work. Provisions are stored. The household reorganizes itself around a keeper's return. Her mother and siblings no longer depend on Abbie for every decision, but the knowledge she used remains available for the next absence or difficult night. The story does not end by making hardship desirable. Distance still complicates supply. Weather still limits travel. Illness still increases the burden on everyone else. What changes is our understanding of how the station endured those conditions. It was not held together by a solitary vigil. It was supported by teaching, repetition, shared domestic labor, and a young woman trusted with technical work because she had learnt to do it. You leave the towers with their glass ready for another cleaning, and their lamps ready for another preparation. Behind you, the hens return to their more ordinary place. The stores are counted with less urgency, and the family continues. The two lights have completed their practical answer. Training distributed through a household can become the redundancy that keeps both family and signal functioning. when one keeper must be away. A later federal lighthouse system would try to make such continuity visible on paper. You move now from the exposed main rock toward a late 19th century station household after 1872, when keepers were required to maintain federal records. The next people are not presented as one documented family with invented names. They are a clearly labeled composite, assembled from official instructions and surviving station logs. The doorway is quieter here. A keeper has come down from the lantern with a small fact that must not be lost before morning. An assistant has noted the weather. A spouse has helped account for stores used in the dwelling and tower. An older child has carried an allowed item to the workroom. The exact division varies by station, but the principle is familiar. Local work must be observed, shared, and then reduced to entries a distant office can understand. You pause beside the closed logbook. It will contain no sweeping account of what lighthouse life means. It will ask for weather, work, stores, personnel, visits, and the condition of the station. The next story begins with a blank line waiting for one ordinary day to become part of the federal record. The composite principal keeper opens the journal before the memory of the watch can blur. Federal instructions call for a line for every day, kept in ink, neat and current. The station's work has to be compressed without becoming vague. Weather belongs there, so do visits, important work, deliveries of stores, and changes affecting the station. He does not write yet. First he checks the watch book kept for the night duty. An assistant has recorded when the watch began and ended, the condition of the light, and whether the fog signal was used. The entries are brief because the book is not a private diary. It is a working record that allows one watch to be understood by the next, and the principal keeper to know what happened while another person was responsible. Across the room, the spouse places a used oil measure near the account book rather than returning it unnoticed. An older child sets down a cleaning cloth that has finished its permitted journey from the workroom. The household is composite, but each action is grounded in the kind of shared station life documented across the service. The principal keeper compares the watch entry with what he has seen in the lantern. A steady light and an uneventful watch still require a record. Reliability leaves paperwork even when nothing dramatic occurs. Before closing the books, he checks the date against the station calendar and confirms that the line belongs to the correct watch. A misplaced day could confuse a later repair sequence or make an oil total appear wrong. The assistant reads back the watch times. The spouse confirms when the store cupboard was opened. Their observations do not become equal official signatures, but they help the keeper enter the local facts accurately. The page is prepared through shared memory before it becomes one person's required record. The assistant returns to the lantern before dawn and examines the flame. This station's lamp and lens are not assigned the machinery of Point Reyes. Its fuel, lens order, tower arrangement, and staffing belong to its own place and date. The composite keeps those details general where the federal instructions were general. What remains constant is the obligation to maintain the light shown for this station. The assistant sees a narrow deposit on one pane and notes where it lies. A wick that smokes can waste fuel and cloud glass, so the condition will matter during the morning cleaning. He adjusts only what the burner requires, then watches long enough to be certain the flame has settled. The principal keeper remains below, available and responsible for the station even while an assistant holds the watch. The watch book receives a few more words. Condition of light, good after adjustment. Weather, overcast, wind moderate. Fog signal, not in operation. These are not quotations from a single surviving page, but a composite use of the categories required by official instructions. The entry transfers observation into a form another person can inspect. The assistant closes the book and returns his attention to the lamp, because recording a condition does not maintain it. In the workroom, the spouse counts the oil that has moved from storage into service. Official account books require exact quantities, rather than a general impression that enough has been used. The principal keeper checks the measure and enters the expenditure. Fuel is both the material of the light and federal property for which the station is accountable. The number connects several parts of the night. It reflects how long the lamp burned, whether the wick was managed properly, and whether waste or leakage may have occurred. A surprising amount would not prove a fault by itself, but it would give the keeper a reason to inspect. A consistent amount allows the station to plan until the next delivery. The older child watches from the doorway while the adults complete the entry. Children in Lighthouse families could assist according to age and circumstance, but the account remains the keeper's responsibility. The measure is cleaned and placed where it can be found again. The oil container is secured. What was carried up the stairs has become a precise line in a daily expenditure book. The household moves quietly around that conversion from substance to record. He also inspects the storage floor for any sign that the measured difference came from a leak rather than the lamp. The boards are dry, the container sound, and the stopper properly seated. That brief physical check gives meaning to the number in the account. A written quantity is useful because someone has looked for the material cause behind it. The spouse returns the measure to its marked place, leaving the next issue of oil easier to trace. The weather changes enough to require another observation. A low bank reduces visibility beyond the station, though not yet to the point that this station's fog signal must begin. The principal keeper steps outside, studies the conditions, and listens. Federal instructions can define duties, but someone on site must decide what the local weather is actually doing. He returns to the signal apparatus and checks readiness. The fuel or power, operating parts, and means of starting must be available if fog closes in. At stations with bells, whistles, sirens, or other signals, the exact equipment varied. The composite keeps only the shared obligation. The apparatus must work when its characteristic sound is required. The assistant remains with the light. The spouse makes sure the workroom path is clear. The principal keeper records the weather in the form the station uses, then waits for the next change rather than forcing certainty from one glance. Visibility holds. The signal remains ready but silent. That restraint is also part of the work. A keeper must respond to conditions, not to the wish for a more interesting entry. At the next change of watch, the assistant gives a direct account of the lamp. The flame needed one small adjustment. The glass shows a trace of soot. No part of the rotating or fixed apparatus, whichever belongs to this station, has shown an obvious fault. The incoming adult receives those facts before taking position. Official instructions place continuous attention at the center of night duty. Where assistants are assigned, they share the watch rather than leaving the principal keeper to perform every hour alone. The principal remains answerable for the station, but responsibility is made practical by scheduled turns and clear reports. The station must not be left unattended. The incoming watch checks the lamp rather than accepting the report as a substitute for sight. The flame is steady. The oil supply is sufficient for the remaining dark. The soot mark is noted for morning. A hand touches the appropriate control, then withdraws. The previous assistant goes below. One person rests because another person is awake, and the record shows when that transfer occurred. A small repair waits on the bench. Earlier in the day, a latch began to bind where damp air reached it. The principal keeper entered the work in the journal because repairs affecting the station belong in the continuing record. Now he tests the cleaned part before it is returned to service. The latch is ordinary, but an ordinary failure can complicate the path between dwelling, workroom, and tower. Federal logs preserve many such entries. Repairs to buildings, equipment, boats, fences, and signal apparatus, along with the arrival of mechanics or supplies. The record is useful precisely because it does not reserve attention for disasters. The spouse holds the lamp while the keeper aligns the piece. The older child remains out of the way but ready to carry the empty toolbox back. The repaired latch closes cleanly. The keeper notes completion without enlarging it into a story. Later, an inspector reading the journal can see that the defect was observed, work was done, and the station returned the part to service. Local hands have made a distant system legible. The toolbox is checked before it is put away. Each item returns to the station inventory, and the worn cleaning rag is separated from materials intended for the lens. The principal keeper looks once more at the latch from both sides of the door. It holds without forcing. Only then does he consider the work complete. The journal entry will be short, but the repair has been tested through the action the part must perform. As daylight strengthens, the lantern room changes from a place of watch to a place of cleaning. The lamp is still burning, so the final steps wait for the scheduled extinguishing. The incoming watch examines the lens and brass in the improving light. Smoke, dust, and salt show themselves more plainly now. Official instructions treat cleanliness as part of optical performance. Lens surfaces must be handled carefully, with materials suited to the glass. Brass must be kept clean without allowing polishing compound to reach places where it can do harm. The work is not decorative. Clear glass passes and directs the lamp's light as designed, while clean fittings make inspection and adjustment easier. The spouse lays out cloths in the workroom. The principal keeper checks that the correct materials are available. The assistant finishes the last portion of the watch. Each person prepares one part of the morning sequence before the flame is put out. The station does not wait until darkness returns to discover that cleaning supplies are missing or a tool has been misplaced. Preparation follows the night as naturally as the night followed preparation. The station's supply books lie beside the journal. A delivery made earlier in the month has already been entered. Oil, wicking, cleaning materials, and other authorized stores. The principal keeper compares what remains with the general account. Items issued to the station belong to an inventory that must be reconciled, not absorbed invisibly into household life. This boundary requires care because official and domestic work share rooms, boats, labor, and time. The spouse may help carry or counter station supply, but the keeper records its official use. Food for the family is not confused with fuel for the lamp. A cloth assigned to the lens is kept from ordinary cleaning. The distinction protects both the apparatus and the people responsible for it. A requisition for the next delivery will depend on these records. Too little requested could leave the station short. Too much without explanation could draw a question. The principal keeper counts the remaining wick material and checks the oil level in storage. The figures agree closely enough with the daily expenditures. He leaves the books open for the final entry after sunrise. Personnel changes also pass through the record. An assistant may arrive, leave, take approved absence, or be replaced. A family member may perform substantial work without holding the same official title, while an appointed woman can be principal keeper or assistant in her own right. The service's paperwork does not capture every hour of family assistance, but it does establish who holds formal responsibility. At the composite station, the principal keeper checks the duty schedule for the coming week. One assistant is expected to travel with the supply boat when it arrives. Another adult must therefore cover the watch that would otherwise be vacant. The adjustment is written down before memory and convenience can produce a gap. Knowles means stuntism Tasiki. The spouse studies the household side of the same change. Meals, cleaning, and care must fit around the altered watch. The older child can assist with a limited errand in daylight. The formal roster and the domestic plan are different records of one reality. A station remains dependable when both recognize who will be present at each necessary hour. The principal keeper marks the revised watch beside the assistant's name and leaves no blank interval between the two assignments. A spouse who has long assisted may understand the apparatus fully, yet an official schedule still identifies the appointed person on duty. The distinction matters to accountability without diminishing the household labor around it. Everyone can see the same evening taking shape. One adult absent with the boat, another on watch, and the family work adjusted around both. An inspector is expected later in the season, though no exact day has been promised. The possibility does not create a separate performance. It reinforces the standard the station is meant to keep every day. The light apparatus, fog signal, buildings, boats were assigned, stores and books may all be examined. The principal keeper walks through the station with that expectation in mind. He checks that the journal is current, the account books agree, and repair entries identify what was done. He looks at the lantern not as a visitor would, but as someone responsible for every overlooked film and loose fitting. The assistant tests a tool and returns it to its place. Inspection links the local household to the federal Lighthouse administration. A distant office cannot stand beside every flame. It relies on appointed keepers, periodic visits, written instructions, and records that reveal whether supplies and apparatus are being managed. The inspector's future arrival gives the books an audience, but the night's steady light remains the first evidence of the station's work. The fog bank thins before the signal is needed. The principal keeper records the change in weather and leaves the fog apparatus ready. A record of non-use may be as important as a record of operation when it explains the fuel and maintenance figures. The station's books gain meaning from agreement among separate entries. He compares the watch book, journal, and expenditure account. The watch shows a steady light with one adjustment. The journal will note overcast weather, a repaired latch, and no fog signal. The oil entry fits the hours burned. None of these records tells the entire night, but together they create redundancy on paper. An error in one may be noticed because another does not fit. The spouse closes the storage cupboard after the count. The assistant makes one final circuit of the lantern. The older child leaves the doorway and carries breakfast things toward the dwelling. The station is moving toward morning through linked tasks, each simple enough to describe and important enough to complete. The final hour of darkness is often the easiest time to become imprecise. The light has burned through most of its appointed period. The weather is improving, and breakfast can be smelled from below. The composite keeper treats that ease as another condition to manage. The watch continues until daylight, and the station's schedule allow the lamp to be extinguished. He checks the flame, then reads the previous entries without leaning on them too heavily. A steady record does not guarantee the present minute. The assistant has handed over a sound lamp, but the principal keeper still looks at the wick, the fuel, and the glass. The soot mark remains narrow. The flame has not begun to gutter. Below, the spouse prepares the morning work so that extinguishing can lead directly into cleaning. Cloths, trimming tools, and the oil measure are arranged. The older child keeps the doorway free. These actions do not appear separately in the Federal Journal, yet they make the official task possible. The written system rests on a household that can place the right object near the right pair of hands before fatigue turns a small delay into neglect. A page farther back in the journal contains an earlier repair, a supply delivery, and the visit of an inspector. The principal keeper does not read it for entertainment. He uses it to confirm when a part was last serviced and whether the next inspection may ask about it. A terse entry can preserve a useful sequence long after the details of the day have faded. The clockwork or fixed apparatus at this composite station remains unnamed because stations differed. What matters here is the habit of tracing maintenance through the book. If a bearing was cleaned, a pane replaced, or a signal part repaired, the date and work should be recoverable. The current latch entry joins that practical memory. The keeper turns back to today's blank line. He will not add assumptions about why the latch bound or predict how long the repair will last. He will record the condition observed and the work completed. The discipline is quiet. It separates a fact from a guess and gives the next keeper, assistant, or inspector something firmer than recollection. The assistant comes down from the lantern and reports the last interval. The lamp remained steady. Visibility continued to improve. The fog signal was not required. The principal keeper receives the watchbook and places his initials where the station's procedure calls for them. The handoff is smaller than the one at midnight, but it serves the same purpose. One person states what was seen, another assumes responsibility for what remains. The assistant can now eat and rest. The principal keeper stays with the light until the proper extinguishing time. Shared responsibility does not divide the station into isolated pieces. It joins the pieces through reports, records, and repeated checks. The spouse brings the expenditure book to the work table. The oil figure is ready. The older child waits for permission before carrying an empty container away. No one rushes the last minutes. The light that has been watched all night deserves the same attention near dawn that it received at lighting. He turns the watch book so the assistant can verify the times before leaving the table. The entries connect without overlap or gap. The principal keeper then places the book where the next watch will find it, not under a stack of accounts or among household papers. Its location is part of the routine. A record intended to support continuous attention must itself be available at the moment responsibility changes hands. Daylight gathers against the lantern glass. The principal keeper looks outward, then back at the flame. He confirms the station's schedule and waits. Below, the journal line has been partly composed in his mind. Weather, one small repair, no fog signal, light in good order. It will be brief because the books are meant to preserve operations, not the full weight of each stair climbed. The cleaning work is ready to begin as soon as the burner is safe. The soot mark will be removed. The wick will be trimmed for the next lighting. Brass and glass will be attended with the correct materials. Oil will be measured and the lamp prepared. Nothing in that list is new to the household. Its familiarity is the source of steadiness. The assistant closes the outer door against a draft. The spouse checks the cloths once more. The child moves back from the work area. The keeper watches the strengthening light outside until the signal from the lamp is no longer required. Another night's records wait on the table, reduced to categories that can travel far beyond the station. At the scheduled time, the principal keeper extinguishes the lamp. The flame narrows, disappears, and leaves the familiar trace that morning work will remove. He checks the burner, makes the apparatus safe, and opens the lantern room to the cleaning already prepared below. Then he returns to the journal. In one plain line he records the overcast night, the repaired latch, the steady light, and the fact that the fog signal was not used. The oil expenditure is entered in its own book. The watch times remain in theirs. Separate records agree on the ordinary shape of the night. The inspector may read the line later. A replacement keeper may use the repair date. A distant office may count the oil. For the household, the immediate consequence is simpler. The lamp is out on schedule, the glass and wick are ready for attention, and breakfast can begin. By evening, the same doorway, stair, lamp, and books will be waiting. The federal system will depend again on local people noticing, sharing, cleaning, and writing. The lamp rests after the long burning. Its wick is dark and still. Clear glass holds the first light of dawn, while the stair below keeps the shape of every careful climb. You can let those familiar things remain where the night has left them. Lamp, wick, glass, and step. Each quiet now, each already known. Nothing needs to be added. The doorway stands open to the pale morning, and the workroom beyond has settled around the tools that were used. The iron weight hangs without hurry in the remembered tower. Above it, the turning lens has become still in daylight. You have followed the weight down and the keeper back up, one measured interval at a time. Now only the shape remains, the cord, the gears, the stair, and a handrail curving toward the lantern. Wind lies beyond the glass. Inside, the mechanism is held in readiness, with no need to move until its familiar work returns. Two lamps remain in memory, each with its own wick and clear glass. The path between them is known. A doorway, a few carried things, a stair rising toward one light and then another. You can leave the household close by, with the oil put away and the cleaning cloth folded. The night has passed through repeated visits and returned every object to its place. Dawn rests evenly on the towers and the room below. The logbook lies open at one plain line. Ink has dried beside the night's small facts, and the page no longer asks for anything. You can see the lamp reflected faintly in the glass, the stair descending beyond the doorway. and the quiet weight of the book on the table. One hand has finished writing, another evening remains only as the familiar order of wick, oil, glass, and watch. Not yet begun. Dawn fills the lantern without the flame. The glass is clear. The wick is ready. The weight, stair, logbook, and doorway remain together in the softening outline of the station. You have no farther step to climb. The last page can rest. The last tool can lie still, and the lamp can keep its place in the growing light. Beyond the doorway, morning stays pale and unhurried. Inside, the known objects remain quiet,